Hi everyone, Megan here from Romance by the Book with the lovely Marielle.
Hello.
Our final week for April, we're reading A Gentleman's Gentleman by TJ Alexander. So good.
There's been lots of happenings so
Yes.
far, and we've returned to the seat of the earldom
Yes.
and like
Um,
just got
well,
there.
we Christopher is watching him Harding sleep in the carriage,
Oh,
which
that's
is
true.
very sweet. And then of
And
course
he
as soon
keeps
as
thinking that like if it was another if I wasn't the earl and he wasn't my valet and this was a different time,
yeah,
he could put his head on my lap and I could like he just is, and then he feels guilty because Plinkton's like on his
right.
deathbed and
So then of
he's
course
over
as soon
here
as they
like
arrive, he like rushes in to talk to the doctor. It's not looking good. Christopher goes in to see Plinkton, and the doctor and Harding leave to talk about like hiring a nurse and all this kind of stuff. And Plinkton kind of wakes up and he sees Christopher there and he's like, "Oh my God, did you come all the way just for this?" I think, or something is like what he said. And
kind of like
Christopher's
you didn't
like,
need to make so much fuss over me and
"Yeah."
it's like well
And he's like,
yes,
"How are you feeling?" And Plinkton says, "I'll be all right." And he's like, "Oh, great. So you'll be," and he's like, "No, I'll be all right." Like
and you
saying,
will too, he
and
says,
you
you'll
will
be all
too.
right too, and
Yeah.
I'm like,
You will too, my lord. And then he says, "Please keep yourself safe when I'm gone. I protected you as long as I could. I never told another soul." And Christopher's like, "What the are you talking about?" Like he's immediately like
he knows, but
panicked.
he's like
Yeah.
nobody knows.
And so, and he's also
Plinkton,
thinking like, "Oh my God, was I so obvious all this time? Like what?" And Plinkton says it was nothing anyone else would have noticed. He said, "You always lick the sugar off the top of your morning buns. Your brother never did that." And I was like, "Oh
funny
wow."
is that the very first like kind of the first image that we get of him with them is him doing that.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Clearly just a quirk of since childhood that he likes to do. And Plinkton, having known him since then was like
And
clocked
he
it right
did
away.
say, like, he said, I pretty much raised you. Like, if anyone's gonna notice,
Yeah, it would have been
it
me.
was gonna be me.
And he's like, and I did everything I could to protect you, and now you need to keep yourself safe.
Just making sure you're safe. Yeah,
And and then he dies. It was very sad.
it was.
And so they had the funeral, and
And and
Christopher,
Christopher is like, it's he's a little bit like, did he fall asleep? And then he's like, oh no, like no, that was like I think
that was it.
you get the
Yeah.
feeling that he felt well, I felt like he was gonna have a little bit more time and then he just didn't. So
Clearly he was
there.
waiting to say that that was what he wanted to get off his chest before he went.
Yeah, the
Um,
funeral was, it's like, he's like, it's a sunny, it's beautiful day. The skies are blue. And he's like, it's not fair. He deserved.
he
And I think it's,
deserves a terrible storm and like
and
rain.
like the
Yeah,
rain dripping down my face so it could mix with my
yeah.
tears. And I was like, wow,
It's
you
very, yeah.
like his friend is not the only like poetic soul, I guess, or
Yeah,
dramatic soul
absolutely.
in this friendship.
And of course, meanwhile, Christopher's still reeling from Plinkton's last words and what they mean. And the rest of the day kind of passes in a blur. Christopher goes to get ready for bed and he finds Harding unpacking trunks. And he's like, "Go to bed, man. Like, none of us have had any rest. This is horrible. Like, just go to sleep. We can deal with it tomorrow." And then thunder like cracks loudly and Christopher like starts freaking out a
Yeah,
bit. Yeah. He kind of like shoves himself in
all
the
the way.
corner of the like, dressing room and
Like
it
PTSD freaking out. Like
for
he
sure.
is not.
Definitely flashbacks for sure. And also he hears this horrible noise from down the hall and he's like, "Oh my God, the ghosts have finally come. They're gonna come and get me." And meanwhile, Harding is like, "What's
What is
happening right now?
happening?
Like, are you okay?" And he's like, "Don't you hear that?" And Harding's like, "Well, I mean, I hear something, but like pretty sure it's not ghosts, right?"
Coming
And
to get us.
so
Like he's, yeah.
yeah. And so Harding's like, "There must just be a window open in that wing. Like, let's go check it out, right?" And so Christopher's like, "Sure, okay." So they go,
First, like we're going to our doom,
right,
but I
like we're
guess
gonna
it's my
die.
time now.
Yeah,
I guess it like it's. I
like
guess
sure, why not? So they go to the unused West Wing And they're kind of tracking the noises. And finally, Harding opens a door, and a gust of wind just puts out their lights like right away. And there's a gigantic hole in the roof where it's pouring rain into that room. And there's a bunch of rats. And he even sees his
Nested
like lost
rats.
cufflink and some other stuff like on the floor, like strewn about.
He had a pocket watch that was like stolen right from the chain. And so he's
Yeah.
like, oh, there's my other stuff. Like
Yeah.
yeah,
And
he's
so he's
taking
like, "Oh, it's
inventory.
just rats." Like, first of all, he's like practically laughing, like, "Oh, thank God." And then he's like, "Do they seem like they're getting closer to us? We should really maybe leave this room. That's a lot of rats." And so they kind of like back out of the room and
Away.
leave quickly. And so Harding says he'll send word to the village tomorrow for some rat catchers and also for like a roofer.
Someone to fix that roof. Yeah.
And so they go back to Christopher's room to dry off, and Harding sees how freaked out Christopher still is about the storm, and he wants to know why. And so Christopher decides that he's trusted him this far, and now there's like one more thing, basically. So he starts to tell Harding about how he was brought up differently from how you see him now. You wouldn't recognize me, etc. And he's kind of hoping, like, is he getting the message? And all of a sudden, Harding jumps up and starts undressing. And Christopher's like, what's happening right now? Like,
He's like,
Christopher
I don't know
cannot
what I
believe
was
what he's
expecting,
seeing.
but nudity was not it.
Yeah. And also I didn't say anything to make him want to like jump up and take his clothes off. Like, I don't understand. And so he Christopher is very confused until Harding's shirt opens and he sees the chest binding on Harding as well. And he is like verklempt, first of all, because he's never met another person that was like him. And he just like jumps up and full body like embraces him. And uh it's just so like such a moment of like, oh my God, like I thought I was the only person in the world that was having this experience. And like, what are the chances of this, you
To
know?
Harding, like, did you think you were the only one too? And he was like, well, I've heard of other people. He's like, you heard of what? Like, it
Yeah,
was so funny because clearly, like, Christopher has been um a little bit sheltered. Like,
yeah,
even though he was living as a man and went to college and did all the like went to university and everything,
yeah.
there's still a lot that he was not aware of. And
And especially living so far away from the city and all different types of people and stuff, like he would not hear these same things that like Harding was hearing.
Harding is talking about things that like internationally, so because he's like, this is a
Right.
big world and there's a lot of grace, I think he says that, like,
Yeah.
so just, but he's thinking on like a bigger scale than even what
Right. And
Christopher
but he
is.
does say he's never met anybody else in person that he knows of that was like him.
Yeah.
And so Christopher tells him the rest of the story about his childhood with his parents and his brother, his twin. His dad had to travel to Philly, like we said before. They all went as a family. The yellow fever killed his parents, and then he and his brother recovered, and they decided to return to England based on the advice of the solicitors and everybody. And his brother was talking about like Christopher getting married, etc., which of course he had no interest in. And so he was sort of like impending doom on this boat, like waiting to get back to England and be stuck in this life that he didn't want.
Brother was kind of seasick. So
Very,
they
very
were
seasick.
also spending a lot of time in the cabin and just like up, like his brother was either in the cabin or up on the deck
With
trying to
his
like
head like over the
breathe. Yeah.
rail, like barfing. So sick the whole time. And so this horrible storm hit, and his brother was up on the deck, and there was a fire on the boat too. Like a lot was happening. And his brother fell overboard and died. And
Sees this.
Christopher,
Like Christopher um was up there. Like he went up to check on his brother when he heard the commotion and sees his brother, and then like a wave
like, sees his
splashes
brother
and
get
whatever.
taken
And when
away.
he
Yeah.
looks back up, his brother's gone.
And this is
And
where his guilt starts coming in because he says, I stood there for a second, like frozen. And of course, Harding is like, oh, like there's nothing you could have done. Like, don't be ashamed of that. And he's like, no, I stood there for a second. And then the first thing I did was run back to our cabin, put on my brother's clothes, chop off my hair. Like, it was the most horrible and selfish thing I've ever done. Like, thinking back on it now, I can't believe I didn't even spend 1 second, like, mourning my brother. The first thing I did was take his life,
yeah.
basically. And
And
Harding
the
is
thing
like,
that's interesting is that he had been up there in these like big morning clothes, like black,
yeah,
and it's interesting because he will not wear any color that's at all dark. So
yeah,
he's in all in black in the storm, and the clothes was weighing him down,
yeah,
like physically, but
yeah,
obviously in other ways too,
yes,
because he
absolutely.
knew that his future was going to be to go home and like have a whole life that was not what he wanted. So, yeah, the moment it's like the moment happened and he
He took his moment.
took
Yeah.
it and then
And
spent the
and
rest
so
of his life
Harding is
feeling
like, I
guilty about it.
understand. Like, I completely understand what you're saying. Like, and he kind of comforts him a little. And it's funny enough, the first thing he says to him is, "Can I ask you a favor? Now that I know everything, can I dress you?" And Christopher's like, "Really? Like that's what you're thinking about right
And
now?" Like,
he's like, surely I can do my job now.
right. Like it's hilarious. Um and so Harding so of course he agrees. He's like, "Sure, why the hell not at this point, right?" So Harding goes and gets himself dressed first, and then he comes into Christopher's dressing room, and as Christopher was waiting, he's thinking about his final secret, which is like his feelings for Harding, and also that he's attracted to men in general, which like because he'd never met anybody like him, he didn't necessarily assume that like he assumed there were people like him and that there were people like Etienne who is gay and sleeps with men, but he didn't necessarily assume that those two would coalesce. You know what I mean?
We could also, I mean, I don't think we mentioned it in our I think it was in the first bit that this happened, or maybe the second. That when he was with Etienne, like the first time we see them together,
Mhm.
he mentions that he does find Harding attractive, and then he has this thought of like, does it make me less of a man that I am like attracted and like romantically interested in men? And they have a whole conversation
Well, because
about how
Etienne
like
is like,
that's
"Do you
not,
think I am less of a man because I take men into my bed?" And he's like, "No, of
yeah.
course not." And he's like, "Then what? Then what are you talking about?" You
Yeah, and so I
know?
have a whole conversation about this, but clearly it's like it's still kind of like it's hard for him to navigate, and which of course it would be. Like if you've never met anyone like you, like how would you know if something's normal? I mean, I feel
Yeah.
as a woman, I feel like when you go through like puberty,
Hmm.
there's information and people tell you things about like what's happening,
Hmm.
but when like you're on the other end of that and you and things like people like if menopause and stuff, like people are like, oh yeah, you get a hot flashes, okay, but there's
Right.
like a lot more to it that like
A lot
only now
more.
like
Yeah.
have people that are like writing books about it and doing, but like for a long time. And I'm like, so navigating something where like no one has told you anything and you're like, is this normal,
Yeah.
am I dying,
How would
like
you
what is
know that? Yeah. How would you know?
right.
Yeah.
And I think it's a similar, I mean, not the same thing, but kind of a
Yeah.
similar, it feels similar to me, where it's like, what, how would he know? Like
Yeah.
what is okay and what's not, and
Yeah.
what's supposed to be happening here. Um, so yeah, I thought
It is an
it was
interesting scene because it's
interesting.
like he decides he still needs to keep that secret, but he also does feel like super unburdened by what he's already been able to share. And so he's kind of in a weird, like in between space with that.
It's interesting to see him kind of compare notes with Harding too, a little bit.
Yeah.
Like, is this how things are for you? And also, like, you know, uh,
Yeah.
what all
And
like what have you investigated?
right. And so Harding starts undressing him, and he's taken aback by this compression vest. Like, of course,
Oh,
he's never
he's
seen
real
anything
excited
like it.
about it.
And also he's surprised because he realizes that that means that Etienne knows Christopher's secret. And Christopher is like, I mean, of course, he's my best friend, but also like, could you actually hide this from your tailor? Like, I'm not so sure. Which of course I'm like, apparently James Harding does, because like he's never like he is perfectly
Harding
coiffed and like
probably.
yeah. So that was interesting. Uh and so they are, like you said, they're talking and kind of comparing notes and everything. And he puts him in his night clothes and they settle back into Harding's bed and they're talking some more. And he asks Harding about his backstory. And he said he had to leave everything behind and start over with a new name. And as he's giving these clues, it's becoming apparent to us, if it wasn't already, that he is the missing daughter of the Duke.
Yeah.
The person who went missing 10 years ago and disappeared forever, that's Harding. And part of the
Had
reason he had to
I
leave
this
is
was
because obviously his father is a Duke and, there was no way that he was ever going to be able to live the life he wanted to live. Um, if he had to live his life, as a woman. And so Belinda is his sister, which is wild and obviously makes a lot more sense about their connection and their closeness and all
and
that.
Christopher's like, "Oh, so you just wanted to have your sister close, but like close."
Yeah.
And he's like, "I mean, yeah. Sorry
But
that
also
I
I knew she could never be with the man she wanted to be with, and I thought this was like a good alternative. Um, but obviously, what we did is better. And so as they're talking on the bed, they're kind of cuddling up and then they end up lying down under blankets and Christopher just like passes out. And of course, he's not a
Well,
good sleeper.
Jill,
He usually has these
you can't
nightmares,
pause
but
that. You can't do that. They get all like, and Harding puts his head like over, like his chin on top of Christopher's head, and he's like, "Do you think you could sleep like this?" And Christopher's like, "No, never," and immediately passes out.
immediately
Which I was like, "This is hilarious."
it was very funny. And so in the morning, Christopher wishes he could wake up like this every day. He's just kind of like watching him because Harding is still asleep. And he's like, I've never been able to like look at his face this close before and not have him realize that I'm like looking at him. Uh, and
So
so
him in like a repose, like a whole
yeah,
relaxed state. He's
it's
expecting him to
very
look
sweet.
somewhat different, but actually he still looks very proper.
Yes.
And
And
Christopher's also like, it's hot but in here, but I
but
don't
I
want
don't
to
want
get
to
out,
move.
but it's real
Yeah,
hot.
it's very sweet. And so as they kind of get up and get moving and they walk down the hall and they see the portraits and Harding kind of says, we should take this portrait down of this girl. Like this your twin sister. Like we should take this down. Like you're just torturing yourself with it every day. Nobody else even comes here. Like why is this still here? And
The brothers, it's like, yeah.
yeah,
Like
he doesn't get
if
to
you're
hang
not
up the
having, it's
brother's
not like,
portrait because it's he's supposed to be him and he doesn't want anybody to like notice, but like also he's like, you're just torturing yourself. And
mhm.
Christopher finally is like, you know what, you're right. Like it is time to move it. And so they do, they move it. And then they each kind of go do their duties for the day. Harding, of course, has been basically taking over for the butler, so he's been doing a lot of things around the house. And Christopher's got
Christopher is trying
correspondence and everything.
Christopher's been trying to get a hold of Plinkton's like family and
Right.
his friends and try to just let everyone know what happened and maybe like see if anyone wants any of his like he doesn't have a lot of belongings, but like see if anyone wants anything.
Yeah.
And is really sad because there's not a lot of family. Like he was so old and most people have either
Yeah.
passed away or like everyone he wrote is writing
Gone.
back to be
Yeah.
like, "Oh
I don't
no."
live here anymore, whatever. Yeah. So Harding comes by and says they're going to go for a ride. So they ride the horses. They race to the footbridge and then they kind of walk on it over the pond. And Harding says he has an idea for a wife for Christopher, and it is Harding himself. And Christopher is agog at this suggestion. Harding,
Chris
he's like, you,
says
yeah.
Christopher says that this is like a disgusting, despicable. Like he uses words that Harding is like, what?
Well, first he's like, what? what do you mean? Like, how would you even, you're willing to go back to your old self, the petticoats, the horribleness, all of it, right? And he's like, yes, if it means saving dot 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 the Abbey. And I'm like, oh sure, it's about the house, definitely. Like, let's be honest, shall we? And I
Yeah,
wrote LOL
Christopher,
lies. That's what I wrote in my notes.
Christopher is like, of course it's about the Abbey. Like he
Yeah, of
would be
course.
trying to help, but he doesn't love me the way I love him. And I'm like, oh,
Which is like, of course he
friends.
does, you dummy. So, Christopher cannot imagine this because he's trying to picture himself going back to his old life, and he's like, "There's no way in hell." So I would never
Yeah.
ask somebody else to do that. He says it's madness, and you would be miserable, and I can't let you do it. I won't allow it. He says, "I will never consider it. The whole idea disgusts me." That's what he said. And he's like, I watch his eyes just like freeze over, and Harding says, "I see." And Christopher's like, "Oh no, you don't see.
No,
Like
you
that is
don't see
not what I
it.
meant, you know?" And he's like, "I can't
He can't
imagine what
fix
it
it.
costs
It's like
you."
Harding is I mean, they're both stubborn, but he once he's like hurt and he heard what he heard and it's like he can't fix it.
Yeah.
And
Well, and he says
so
to him, he's like, "I'm trying to say, like, I know what it must have cost you to leave your family behind. Like, you can't go back, you know?" And Harding says to him, "Not all of us were lucky enough to have a dead twin." And Christopher is like, oh, like, ouchie. That's like a dagger to the heart. And he says, "That's very unfair of you."
especially
And
because
Harding,
he just told him how guilty he feels and how like that was the
yes,
worst thing he's ever done.
yes.
And he has
He's
throughout
immediately
this
threw in
book,
his
we
face.
haven't really like spent time on it, but throughout the book, he has been like considering like what kind of man he wants to be and like what it would mean to be like a good person. So that was really like
It
a
was really
low
hurtful.
blow.
And so Harding is like, no, he gets on his horse and leaves. And so Christopher kind of kills time. He goes on more of a ride before going back because he's like, we need both need to cool off, right? And he's hurt, but he knows that he hurt Harding badly because of the misunderstanding, and he needs to explain himself. And he says something like, a cornered fox bites. Like he's like, I put him in that position to be hurt, and then he hurt me. Like, I need to fix this. And so he goes and knocks on his door. Nothing. He opens the door. He's clearly gone. Christopher freaks out. He goes down to the kitchen, and Cook is like,
Left a couple, there's like a couple of things that are there that he was like, I mean, he would have taken his shirts, right?
yeah,
But it's clear that he's like gone because his
vacated. Yeah.
valise is gone and most of his stuff is gone.
And so Cook gives him a note that Harding left. And it basically says he's taking the few days away that Christopher had offered before after the whole Gretna Green thing. And he says, if you no longer need my services, leave word at the post office and I'll collect the rest of my things. And Christopher, in a moment of unkindness in his own mind, is like, oh, well, now I can see how he just walked away from his family. Like he's a runner, right? Like he's run away and now like what's gonna
He's doing it
happen?
again. He's real good at that. Like he's
And
yeah.
so, the rat catchers come the next day, and the roofer too. Days are passing. Christopher's feeling like he just keeps temporarily patching these like major issues in this house, and like for what? Like it's basically a sinking ship. He's like, if I go through with a wedding and I get my inheritance and I shore up this house for like another decade, like for what? Like I'm not gonna have any kids. Like the same thing that would happen then is gonna just happen now if I just don't deal with this, right? And like the earldom isn't going to get carried on anyway by my family. So like let's just be done. And so he realizes that only one thing matters to him, and that is James Harding. And so he writes a letter to him and leaves it at the post office like he instructed, and it says, "I have so much to say to you, please come home." And so he and
Thought
Cook,
very hard. It was funny to me because he's like, I thought hard. I wrote it to a
yes,
lot of time. I've
it
got
took
it
a lot
just
of time.
right.
Two
And it's
sentences.
like, come home.
And so he and Cook are passing the days away, and one day they have a picnic out in the garden, and he asks if she would like to go visit her family.
He also
And
asked her name, which was really
so cute.
funny to me.
He's like, this might make me sound like an idiot, but like, what is your name? And so she laughs and she's like, "It's Anne." And he's like, "Okay, Anne, would you like to go and visit your family?" And she's like, "Oh, I could never leave you right now." And he's like, "No, now is the perfect time to leave me. Like, I'm planning for my future, and some things will be easier if I'm here alone. And like, you should go visit your family. And also, while you're at it, take this giant box of baubles, as he calls it, which had belonged to his mother.
It's
Like,
his
please,
mother's
please
like
take these."
jewels. It's like the
And
crown
in his
jewels.
monologue inside, he's like, she's probably never made as much money in her life as these things are worth. And so, which I think she probably is also realizing because she's like, oh no, I could never like take that. And he's like, no, like you would actually be doing me a favor. I have literally no use for them. And pretty soon, like this house isn't going to have any use for them either. So, like, take them. And so he
He says
insists
that he thinks that like he's not going to use them. His mom's gone. There's not going to be any people to hand them down to, and he would like to give them to family. And I was like, oh,
yes. And she is
Anne.
that for him
And
for
Anne
sure.
has a sister that she could go visit. So
Yes.
she's kind of like, well, if
So
it would help
she,
you out.
yeah, she reluctantly agrees. And she leaves the next day. And so Christopher has been plotting and planning this whole time.
First,
And
like James Harding should be back today or tomorrow, depending on what a few days means to
to
him.
him, right. And so as he's in his study or something, I think, and he hears footsteps. And he's like, "Well, I know I'm alone this time, so great. Like, are we dealing with an actual ghost this time? Like, what's happening?" And then he hears the front door. And so he stands up and looks out the window and he sees James Harding very quickly walking away from his house. And he's like, "Are you for real? Like, what?" And he looks down at his velvet slippers and he's like, "Oh, too bad." And he goes running out of the house. He's calling to him. He's
The
not
front of
stopping.
the house calling and like, oh, I'm gonna ruin these slippers, aren't I?
Yes.
But he does ruin the slippers
Yes.
because he's
He,
not gonna let James get
no.
away.
And he's
Because
not,
when
he's so much
he
taller
calls
than
to him
him.
and he speeds up instead of turning around. He's like,
Yes.
oh God, I'm gonna have to
And he's
chase
so
this
much
man
taller than
down.
him. His legs are longer. He's like, "This isn't fair. Like, slow down." And so, he's running after him and he is like, "Why are you skulking around not saying anything?" And finally he just says, "I came for my things." And he's like, "You can send, I'll tell you where to send my money." And he's like, "If it's convenient," he says. And he's like, "No, it's not convenient." And Harding is like,
And
"Well,
keep it
fine. Then say keep my
if you
money
think that's fair.
if you think it's fair." Yeah. And he's like, "No, you're not listening. Like, do you really mean to quit?" And that finally makes him stop and turn around. And he's like, "You're the one who
Quit.
wants
You're
me
the one.
gone, aren't you?" And Christopher's like, "No, like, did you not read my note?" And he's like, "Well, yeah,
He says you left a note
yeah."
at the post office, and he's like, "Did you not read
And
it?"
he
And
says,
he's like,
"Yes, and like, that's what you said to do." And he's like, "No, I said to leave a note at the post office if you didn't want me to come back."
It's
And
like
he's
who
like,
doesn't? He's like, did you? Who doesn't read their
it was so
notes?
funny because in his monologue, he's in his inner monologue, he's like, "Never in my life have I raised my hand to anyone." But he's like, "I was so frustrated by this man. I literally just could not contain my body." He like hits him on the arm and he's like, "Who leaves a note unread? Who?" Like he's very distressed.
He did not read
And
the note.
they're like,
He left it at the post office with
he
the postmaster. He was like,
wouldn't even look at it.
okay, you keep it.
So they're pushing and pulling at each other until they fall into the pond because they have made their way back to the bridge where they got in the fight the first time around.
He asked him what the note said, but I don't know. Can't even remember what he responded because it was not what the note
He
said.
said,
He was
"It
just
said you're
like,
an ass." That's what he
yeah,
said. And he's like, "So I am,
you
I
are
am
fighting
the
with me. I don't know what's happening.
I don't have my duties anymore." And he's like, "Yes, no, that's not what I said." Like, and so they're just like arguing and they're like shoving each other back and forth and they fall into the pond. And so Christopher can't swim, which we figured out earlier when the whole boat story. And he starts panicking. But he's like, "I'm not going to die like this. Like, hell no. I haven't even told him the most important things yet. Like, I'm going to live, right?" So he's like reaching for the top of the water
He's
and he gets to
trying
it.
to save James. He's like, James, don't die. And James is standing
He's standing.
with
He
his two
said,
feet on the bottom of the pond. And
"It's
he's
not
like,
that deep."
it's not that deep.
Christopher says, "Oh." And so, "You really didn't read my note," he says to him. And he's like, "No, I left it there. Cowardly, I know," he says. And so he says, "So I'm not dismissed?" And Christopher's like, "No, I want to marry you, actually." And James is like, wait, you changed your mind? Like you were very adamant before that that was not going to happen. And Christopher's like, no, you won't go back, not for any reason, not for me, not for anything. I don't care about this property or this title or any of it. Like, let's leave. Let's be husbands to each other and let's get out of here. And of course, James Harding is very into this idea, but he's like, how will we live? Like, if you don't have a property and you don't have your money, like, what are we going to do? Right. And he says to him, Christopher says to him, like you said before, the world is wide and full of grace. Would you walk through it with me? Which I thought was so
Yeah.
romantic. And of course, James Harding says yes. And Christopher kisses him, which of course he doesn't know what he's doing. And he's like, as soon as I let Harding take over, then the kiss was much better, which was so cute. And then Harding says, is this real? You actually want me? And Christopher says, of course I do. I love you entirely, which was just like made me
It's
swoon
really sweet.
forever. And he's like, will you still want
And
me
it's good
even
that
when
they
I'm a mister?
clarified because James definitely, like James Harding definitely thought that he was like opposed to them marrying, like
Yes.
as they, he's like, no, I just don't want you to like have to,
I'm opposed to
like,
you having to go back to that life that you don't want in order
yeah,
to make it happen. And he's like, Christopher's like, will you want me even when I'm a mister and not an earl? And James is like, of course I will. Like, it's you I love, not all these trappings. So, um, they are kissing some more, and then they're like, oh my God, let's go. Like, we're disgusting because they've been in this pond. So they go back to the house. And at home, they're like undressing each other, and Christopher says he doesn't know what he's doing. And Harding, he's like, it seemed like when we talked about it before that maybe you did know what you were doing. So, like, you got this or what, basically. And Harding is like, yes, I've given pleasure to people before, like men and women, but I've never like taken any for myself. So this will be like new for me too, basically.
newish. And then he is
Um,
also like, well, you know, as they're getting into it, he's also like, maybe we could do some things that neither one of us has done before. And I was like, oh, that's cute. That's cute.
yes, it was very sweet. And so, as they're kissing and undressing still, Christopher is like, we'll have to leave England. Like, where do you want to go? And James suggests they go back to Philadelphia because Christopher talked about how much he loved growing up there. And so Christopher agrees. But he's like, we're bringing Orion. Like, I can't leave Orion here. He's like the one other being that I refuse to like be without, basically. And
Yeah.
so, and he's like,
And
oh,
they
and I'll have
talk
to write
about
to
sending
Etienne.
his sister a wedding present. And so
Well, he's
there's,
like the
you know, there's
China, like we can send it to your sister. I'll have to write to Etienne and get a bunch of clothes. And he's like, are we talking about my sister and Etienne right now? We're about to have sex. Like, can we not? Christopher's like, oh yeah, you're right. Okay. It was very funny. And so they do have sex and it's awesome. And that is the end. And so then we get the epilogue, which
for
is,
Megan.
yes, for me, you know, it's my fave. And so they're about to board a ship. It's called Journeyman. In his mind, he's thinking it's much bigger and sturdier than the one that he was on when he was a teenager. And so Christopher's rereading a letter from his solicitors, which is urging him to reconsider leaving the will unsatisfied. But he's like, but you're right,
Of
you know,
course you
we
can
are
do
still your
this, but it's
lawyers until you're not the Earl anymore. So therefore, we have transferred the ownership of the London townhouse to Etienne. We have sent all the household goods to, you know, Chester and his wife, Belinda, and we sold other items and put the money in your accounts, etc. And so then when he gets to the part where they're talking about, but we urge you to remember taxes are owed, and he's like, that's when he stops reading. He's like, the rest is boring. He says to himself. And he has chosen the name Christopher Archer for his ticket on the ship. And he's sort of feeling he was feeling a little guilty about dodging his taxes, but he's like, I don't really because they're gonna get my house. Like the whole property is gonna go back to the crown, so like they can have that, and I'll take this money, and like we'll call it even, right? So the gangplank is kind of lowered, and James kind of grabs his hand discreetly and says, "Shall we, husband?" And they board the ship, and that's the end, and it's very good. So you guys, oh my gosh, we hope you love this as much as we did. It was so sweet and really so enjoyable. So next week we will be talking to TJ Alexander So stay tuned
See
for that, and we'll see you then.
you then. Bye.